I'm here today to talk about change in various forms. Before I go into my quick story, I did want to mention that in addition to being the CEO at Evite, I am proud to say that I am now part of the IMA in a more official capacity. So I've joined as an advisor and board member. Sinan mentioned this earlier today, to really help drive what we're calling the premium experience for this organization. And I've just been amazed meeting folks here. I'm amazed at the quality, and in particular, it really reinforced for me what brought me to this organization, which is, this is not an organization of, we're going to barf a bunch of information to you. This is an organization of true change agents in the space that are coming together to progress the industry forward. And so that's exciting to me. It's particularly exciting because I think we're just scratching the surface as an organization in terms of how we can do that. So between now and the Impact event in Vegas, I will be working with Sinan and his team on really framing up what we're calling a premium service, but think of it as, how do we take these millions of current members that are free and harness their power for change into something greater? Like, how do we give them recognition and reward for the great work that they're doing? How do we help accelerate their careers? How do we as a community come together, binding all of the assets that the IMA has? So that's super exciting, and there'll definitely be more of that to come over the next couple of quarters. In terms of presentation, well, here are my slides. No, I don't have any slides. I will say this is the coolest venue for a speech that I've ever given, so thanks, Sinan, for this opportunity. Now, the topic I wanted to talk about today was change. Again, in that vein of the IMA brings change agents together. I, in my career, have really focused on change, being a catalyst for change in the various businesses. And just 2 seconds about me, I was a weird little kid. For those of you that are a little bit older, I grew up with the Commodore 64. I love computers. Sorry, another. Love computers. I actually do love computers. Love computers at an early age. And when I was young, fairly young, before college, I was a weird kid. I knew that I wanted to be in computers as a business and that I wanted to be a CEO. And that came from two things. It came from the fact I had this Commodore 64 that I dinked around on until 3 o'clock in the morning and used to code, and the fact that I loved Lord of the Rings as a book. And when I read that book, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I want to be a general, not a soldier. So suffice it to say, I ended up becoming a CEO. My first formal CEO gig happened around a little under 10 years ago. And I think it's safe to say I had no freaking idea what that meant to be a CEO back then. But now that I've been in the role, if I had to describe it in a word, it is change. There's a bunch of other things you do as a CEO. You're a psychologist, a psychiatrist, an operator. But really, if I think about organizations at their core and where can executives really add value, it's organizations are horrible at going after change because they have momentum, right? You build organization, you build processes, you have teams, they have roles, they have jobs. That tends to want to have a particular momentum. That's horrible for when you need to change rapidly. So, in a lot of ways, I think of myself as the chief change agent for the company. And again, why I'm excited about the IMA, because it is filled with similar change agents. So I'm going to tell you a little story about change, and I'm not going to focus on strategy or frameworks or process, because that's all really boring, especially at night. I wanted to actually talk about the people side of change, which is really not talked about a lot, but I think is one of the most important things. So I've been a student of leadership and organizational design, and I'll throw 2 words out for you to keep in mind as I go through this story. One is empathy. That's a big one. And the other one is transparency. And those 2 dimensions, as it relates to change, are so critical as a leader. So the story I want to tell you is my first CEO role, which occurred in 2012. Sorry, 2008, ended in 2012. How many of you remember the brand Photo? Does anybody remember that? My God, you guys are all like way too young. How many of you guys know what Facebook is? Okay, good. It's just you're like drunk and you're not raising your heads. So before Facebook, there was what was, in fact, the world's largest photo sharing site. It was called Photo. It's one of the top 10 web properties in the world when it was founded. Facebook and Instagram and many of these sites, their success in terms of scale comes from actual photo sharing. So Facebook hit a major inflection point when it added photo sharing into the experience. Photo had gotten bought by Kodak. How many of you guys know the brand Kodak? Still not a lot. Oh my God. So Kodak had bought Photo, I think in 2001 or 2002, and had really squandered it as an asset because it was not Kodak was a film business, didn't know what to do with an online business. So it was a business that was in really dire need of repair. And Kodak itself, at the time, this was in 2012, was also in need of significant repair because digital cameras had effectively destroyed the film revenue stream for that business, and it was on shaky ground. Total separate aside, because I do feel like I need to give some of my peers at Kodak credit. There is a horrible thought that floats out in the world, which I understand, and it's pretty common, that the executives at Kodak were schmucks, had no idea that digital was coming, and failed to do what they needed to do, right, to stem the tide. That is actually what I thought before I joined the company. So it's a reasonable position to hold. It is totally not true. It's actually, I'll digress for 2 seconds because it's a cool story. Kodak knew that digital was coming way before anyone else did. They actually planted the seeds of technology that would disrupt themselves. They invented sensor technology, the digital camera. They were the #1 sellers of digital cameras in the 2000 period of time. So they knew disruption was coming even before the term was coined. And they were trying to do something about it. But the reality of Kodak is that, at Kodak's peak, it was, I want to say, like a $16 or $17 billion business, where the film was the lion's share of that and hugely profitable. So imagine $16 billion of business going from 2000, 16 billion, 8 years later, I don't know, $1 billion, maybe less. So imagine the compression that happens when you lose that large of a profit stream. There was actually, I would argue, absolutely nothing that the company could have done to stave off bankruptcy, which is what happened. I actually was looking online before this speech to see, well, how fast did Google get to $16 billion in revenue? And it wasn't in 8 years. It was more like 10 years. So literally, if Kodak had invented Google and put it there, it still would not have offset the revenue decline that occurred. So I have a different take, which is they actually did all the right things, and that business was going to go into bankruptcy regardless. So anyway, separate story. So for me, the story I wanted to give you was, so I take over this thing, Photo, online photo sharing site in 2012. It's in a business that is going through radical transformation and is under compression, which is Kodak. And the first board meeting I had, which was about 3 months after I started, was an interesting one. Because they had hired me, they were like, oh, you're this online guy, online, you can turn this thing and make it great. And I came in and diagnosed the business after 3 months and came to the very quick conclusion that we should sell this business because it wasn't healthy. Photo sharing was destroyed by Facebook and mobile phones. It would take 3 or 4 years to build that capability. There were sites like Shutterfly that were already on a growth trajectory. And in terms of shareholder value maximization, it was very clear to me. It was like, sell this thing now, like tomorrow, because you'll get the maximum value. The longer we wait, the less value it's going to be. And at some point when we stabilize, we'll be a 1/5 of the size, a 1/10 of the size of Shutterfly if you extrapolate curves. So I walk into this board meeting, I was a little bit nervous. It was a huge room. It was like the size of almost not quite all these tables, but maybe 5 of these tables. There was more wood in this room. I don't know how many trees they had to cut down to line the walls with wood, but it was like one of those old school rooms. And I gave the presentation, and one of the board members was asleep. I was like, that's not a good sign. But at the end of the day, they said, yes, that makes total sense. You should go pursue a sale. So I had to go back to my team, and I had to make the hard call of, okay, we're gonna actually go try to sell this business. And this is where transparency comes in. Like, do I tell the team or not? And I have a very simple philosophy, which is people are inherently good. People can make good decisions when you give them as much information as possible. And to do anything less than be transparent is to just create downstream issues for yourselves. So I told, not the entire company, but I told my management team absolutely what was happening. I said, here's the recommendation. You're going to go with me to meet private equity or Shutterfly or some of these other companies. Oh, and by the way, you need to keep that in one part of your mind, and at the same time, none of that could happen, so we're going to go fix this business too. I call this the two competing truths mindset. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's one of the hardest things as an executive that you have to do, is that you sometimes are actually chasing two paths that are actually in conflict with each other, but you need to put 100% of energy into both of them. So it's a core component of change. And well, not to my surprise, because I've found this throughout my career. When you give people information, they will actually rise to the occasion. So my exec team did a great job. We went to Shutterfly. They were interested. They were interested in picking us up at the time. This was back in 2000, so I joined in 8, so 2009, I want to say. Kodak, at the end of the day, did not take the deal. I won't describe kind of the details of why that happened, but it bad judgment was not in my control. So that was kind of phase one of the business, right? We transparently pursued a sale. It didn't happen. So then we ended up, for the next 2 years, fixing the business. We went hardcore into the product, and we got it into mobile and photo books and all of the things that had been gaps. Chapter 2 of the story is what I would call the implosion. The implosion happened on January 19th, 2012. It's the day that Kodak declared bankruptcy, one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in corporate history. We were one of the smallest businesses of Kodak in terms of revenue. This was to give you a sense, it was a $140 million business with maybe 300 employees, including manufacturing, right? So, compared to this massive giant, which is Kodak. So we go through bankruptcy, and as a result of that process, we go into the process of shedding what are called non-core assets. Photo Kodak Gallery, as the other term it went by, was a non-core asset. So we got to go through this process of rapidly selling the business, and this was new to me. When you actually sell a business in bankruptcy, you can't actually just go sell a business. You have to auction off the business. And this is not like a fast-talking guy who's like, oh, we want a photo for $1 million. It's not like that. But it's kind of like that. You actually cast a net out. You say, who's interested in this business? So that was phase 2. And again, for my team, and this is a personal philosophy of mine, you don't necessarily have to embrace it, but I just want to unpack how I think. Right? For my team, I could not hold back the fact that we were about to go sell this business. Right? A lot of executives in that situation would have said nothing. They would have run a sales process off on the side and just held the people to some faux plan, and the rationale is actually fairly logical. The rationale is, well, if you tell everyone you're about to go sell this business, everyone's going to go leave. You're not going to have any developers. The product's going to stagnate, and any chance you have of selling this thing is going to go poof. Right? So shareholders are going to get screwed. I don't subscribe to that belief. I don't believe that as an executive you should hold information that can benefit you at the detriment of your employees. So despite my management team's surprise, I said, no, we're going to tell them everything. So we basically said, look, we're going to go sell this business. We're going to run a process. We're going to have a bunch of different end states for this sale, some of which are good for you, employees, and some of which are horrible. So what are the good end states? The good end states are, oh, we might get picked up by private equity or a venture firm and take this independent. That would be really exciting. Like, you guys want to do that? Maybe we'll turn the name back to Ophoto. The bad end states are things like we get picked up by a Shutterfly, at which case we're probably going to lay off everybody because they're just going to acquire the customers, right, and the users, and the images. So we shared that with them, and what happened? Really nobody left. Nobody left the company during that process. Now, we did a couple of things as a management team to ensure that they had safety nets. So we told people, look, you should, if you're not financially secure, if your spouse doesn't work or your significant other doesn't work, you should start thinking about laying seeds with recruiters and other jobs, right? Because if this does land in the negative, what we don't want to happen is for you to then be stuck without a job. So we actually did give people time off from running the business to go talk to other companies and recruiters, right, to at least start to build what I call the option tree. And people did that, and pretty much nobody took those options because they said, no, we are excited about what might happen, and we're going to stay with you. All right, so that was phase 2. It was a great learning for me. I was actually surprised. I thought more people would actually jump ship. But it was just a great testament to when you're transparent with folks and you treat them with empathy, right, that they will come with you. The final chapter, and then I'll wrap up, is what I call the lifeboats. So the irony of the story is at the end of the day, Shutterfly won the bid to buy the business. And they ended up picking up the business for a fraction of what they were willing to pay previously. So that was just not good. And of course, that was the worst end state for the employees, because that meant that we were going to lay off roughly 200 to 300 employees. They took like 3 or 4, but that was about it. So what was the lifeboat phase? The lifeboat phase was we had roughly an 8-month process by which we needed to migrate all of the images and all of the customers to Shutterfly. And again, a normal or maybe a different management team would have just bailed ship at that point in time. They would have said, okay, great, the sale is done. I'm off to my next thing. I constantly get recruiting dings from other companies. So the opportunity cost of seeing the whole thing through was actually quite high. But again, my personal DNA is no. We as an exec team have a responsibility to land as many people from this company in new places as possible. And so we literally diverted our executive energy from running the business to like 80% of our energy was let's find all these people places to land. So I went and talked to LinkedIn and all the startups and venture firms, and we created a landing network for the employees to land in. That was one thing that we did. The other key thing that we did is we were very creative with the layoff waves. So normally you would go through a downsizing because you didn't need everyone to migrate the images, right? So you could get rid of, say all of marketing. We didn't need any more marketing at that point in time. Shutterfly didn't need marketing. So a normal process would have been to say, okay, everyone in marketing goes. We didn't do that. Instead, we basically sequenced layoffs so that people that were close to having jobs would actually get the lifeboat exit, but people that weren't close to having jobs, we would actually just refactor them into a role that was needed for migration so they had more time. So we would have developers that were not needed who would then maybe move into database work that was needed so that they could have a longer runway. And we did that literally for 8 months. It took like 8 to 9 months for all the lifeboats to go out. And I think it's one of the proudest moments that I had as an exec. We had 0 cases of hardship as a result of that downsizing. It was well worth the effort from my perspective. Thank you. But to go that extra mile, you really do need empathy for your employees. Right? Transparency and empathy are just so important. And that's my story. It's just to leave you, if I can just leave you with one gold nugget from the conversation today, if you change one tiny thing of how you think about your teams or how you interact or how you think about your role as a leader, then I'll feel like I've succeeded. But that's my story. Please find a way to bring empathy into your life as a leader as you're driving change, and be transparent, because your people will rise to the occasion. So that's it. So it's kind of a serious message, but I hope useful. Thank you.